Hi, this is Brian Dolan with the law firm Pepper Hamilton. Each month, Pepper partner Greg Nowak hosts a webinar for West LegalEdcenter, which focuses on issues that are affecting private funds and their managers. You can download a copy of the PowerPoint slides that the presenters went through by visiting Pepper's Insight Center at www.pepperlaw.com, where this podcast is posted. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. This is Greg Nowak. I'm a partner in the law firm of Pepper Hamilton. We're an AmLaw 100 firm located in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, D.C., Orange County, L.A., and San Francisco, as well as Rochester, New York, Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, Detroit, and I'm sure there's one or two other places that I forgot. But welcome to our program today. This month we are talking about Internet 3.0 and open questions. As you know, if you've attended other of our webinars, we always try to bring in speakers who will talk about cutting-edge issues that we as practitioners face and that I'm sure as you as practitioners and regulators also wrestle with in your practices. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pass them through, and we will answer them in due course. Without further ado, I'd like the members of our panel to introduce themselves so you can match the name with the voice, since we are not visual but rather auditory today. So first, joining us online is Salvatore Buccellato. Salvatore, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, Salvatore, good attempt on the last name. Salvatore Buccellato. I'm a partner with Ether Delta. As well, I'm also the CRO of Lampix, a flat surface augmented reality company in New York. Have a background in finance for the last 25 years that extends from equities to foreign exchange. Looking forward to addressing some of the questions today and going through this.
Thank you, Salvatore. Sean Belcher.
Yep. My name is Sean Belcher. I'm the Executive Director of the Tezos Commons Foundation. It's a community organization that was built around the Tezos Project. Been doing it for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was doing systems engineering and consulting in the Boston area.
Mohammed.
Hi, this is Mohammed El-Dessouki. I am CEO and co-founder of ViaBlock Limited, our UK startup behind JAX. JAX is aiming to change the way Internet currently works by actually leveraging blockchain technology in the communication stack. I come from 20-year corporate background, mainly in the areas of telecommunications and data networking.
Adrian.
Okay, I'm not a member of the panel, but I'm here as an advisor for Mohammed. I'm the CEO of Block Ventures, and my background is technical and consulting. I was in management consulting before, and I founded my own IT company, software company, helping startups build their software in the New York City area. And in a previous life, I was a PhD in physics.
And last but not least, George Popescu.
Thank you, Greg. So my name is George. I am also an engineer and scientist by training. And I started my entrepreneurial career in the foreign exchange. I've started about a dozen companies, going from foreign exchange to craft beer to car rental, augmented reality, finance, and so on. Presently, I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Lending Times and Blockchain Times, with which I organize events like this with Greg regularly, and also founder and partner advisor to a bunch of different blockchain and crypto companies or groups.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. And everyone always asks, well, what does any of this have to do with investment management and private funds? And the answer is everything. Everything, because Internet 3.0, we believe, is a disintermediation objective process pool. And sooner or later, those who are either in the investment management space as investors or as managers, or who operate private funds, or who are regulators of those businesses, will need to deal with decentralization, will need to deal with disintermediation, and will need to understand it. So what better way to start than with the experts? You heard our panel of experts today, All of them in the industry, none of them lawyers, right?
Nope.
Oh, right. So that means everything I say about the law carries all weight here today. But having said that, what I'd like to do, if you look at the materials that we have, is I'd like to start with page 9, which is a list of problems. And I think for those of us who went to law school because law school was easier than going to business school because we didn't have to deal with math, I think it's useful to start with the problems. So I'm going to jump ball here, guys. What is a decentralized entity, and why is it so important to what we're discussing today?
Maybe I can try to answer that. So right now, for example, if you take a computer, inside the computer you have a CPU, you have memory, you have a hard disk. We're all familiar with that. You have a screen. Now imagine that the CPU is in London, the memory is in San Francisco, the hard disk is, I don't know, somewhere in Latin America, and the screen is in your pocket. That's kind of decentralized computer. That's actually possible. So there are actual projects using just blockchain as a communication protocol. So don't worry about the word blockchain. They're using the internet, new technology on the internet, to allow people to share the usage of their CPU. So if I want to do a big calculation, I can go to all of these computers around the world and ask them to do a little piece of the calculation and to report their answers. Now the problem
Why would these computers do that?
Because they're going to get paid.
Okay.
Comes back to money. So this idea existed before. People were able to volunteer their computers to do this. But before, what was very difficult is how am I going to pay a person in China, a person in India, a person in Russia, a person in Europe, a person in Brazil, 10 cents for using their CPU for 1 minute? And there was no way. With the blockchain now, you can. And this is the novelty. So we could talk about decentralized CPUs. Mm-hmm. And if you take this idea, it can be applied to many other things. Obviously, hardware and, some like decentralized YouTubes and stuff like that, and video compression. But you can think of it in a meta way. Decentralizing things like rules and protocols and agreement methods and many other things. So I hope I was helping a little bit there.
Well, that's very helpful, but probably the most famous decentralized entity, at least the ones that the regulators are most familiar with, is Bitcoin. But it's not really an entity, right? Bitcoin is a process. It's a store of value, very volatile store of value, or a medium of exchange. But it's not really a quote-unquote entity, right? How does Bitcoin work?
Well, I was actually going to point out, too, that similar to Bitcoin, it's a decentralized protocol. And just like HTTP, there's no company for it, yet we use it every day in order to reach our websites. So
but an HTTP protocol, that's everybody's agreed that this is
correct
means and how it works. So it's sort of like a common language.
Because if we didn't, otherwise we wouldn't be able to reach each other.
Tower Babel, right?
It would be a Tower Babel.
Right.
So Bitcoin in this manner is a way to effectively create a gossip network, or a way to witness events. This is really useful. It's expensive to run these networks, and so it doesn't apply to everything. You don't want to decentralize everything because costs go up. In certain areas, they can go down. It can disintermediate things. But overall, what you're really doing is trying to witness or have a bunch of a group of dispersed individuals, nodes, computers, discussing what's going on a network.
So let's go back to the Bitcoin model. You have people who are being compensated through dilution of the value of the network, right? They mine and they get more coins, and that is how they get compensated, presuming that there is value associated with those coins. Mining is very expensive. It's extremely power-intensive and labor-intensive, right? So therefore, there has to be some carrot at the end of that stick for the miners to stay in the game. But the miners also have another function, right? They verify the transactions. And what protocol do they use to verify? Is there a list of questions that they have, or do they make them up on their own as they go along?
Actually, the way they do it is solving a cryptography problem. But
that's for mining purposes, right?
Right.
That's for finding new coins.
Also verifying. It's also verifying every transaction that you put in a block. when I send some Bitcoin to you, maybe a second later I want to send the same Bitcoin to someone else. That would be double spending,
problem, right?
So then these miners who get paid for doing this solve the cryptography problem by having a partial solution to that problem. That's the Bitcoin protocol. So they start from something, because if they started from nothing, then it would be impossible to solve. But they start from a partial answer, and then they solve that partial problem. And once they verify, then that transaction gets added to the blockchain.
But they're all vigilantes. There's no appointed person. They're self-appointed, self-anointed, right?
That's the beauty of the invention behind blockchain.
Is it beauty, or is it potentially the Frankenstein behind it?
That's what unlocks.
Or in the Halloween era.
You're
wearing orange.
Let me rephrase the word beauty into what really unlocked this space. The idea of having decentralized databases also existed before. But the problem was, who gets the right to write the next line in the database?
Right.
Yes. And all kinds of methods were thrown around. And what appears to have been put in place by Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that personality is the idea of using a mathematical problem whose difficulty can be controlled in order to make sure at least one person on the network finds an answer every about 10 minutes, and whoever gets the answer first is allowed to write the next entry in the decentralized data storage.
So there's a competition between all these miners. Who solves it first, that guy gets the coin.
And gets to write the next page.
He gets to write the next page. They get the coin, but how does that verify the transaction that I just transferred, 5 Bitcoin to George?
Because every single transaction in the last page has to reference previous transactions in the previous pages.
Okay.
You cannot write whatever you want in the last page. Only you have to, whatever you write in the page has to reference previous transactions. So you cannot write that Greg Nowak sent 100 Bitcoin to George, unfortunately, because you have to...
Well, first I have to have 100 Bitcoin.
Exactly. So in order let's assume I'm the miner. Let's assume I win this next round of 10 minutes, and I get to write whatever I want in the page. In order for me to be able to write that you sent me these Bitcoins, I have to reference a certain number of previous transactions that show how you ended up with those coins. And by you, I mean the address, obviously. I don't know who's behind it.
We used to call these things linked lists, but now we call it blockchain.
Okay.
So it's an actual data structure in computer science in which it's referencing like a memory pointer. It's the previous transaction to the next transaction. But when you have a dispersed network, some of them could say, well, that's not where you create branches instead. So instead of having a singular list, it can branch off.
But it's not necessary to have decentralized to use this technology. You could have a closed network. You could have 1, 2, 5, or a limited number of verifiers.
But now we are getting back to the initial question. You were starting with a set of problems.
Correct.
And what you just stated is a problem. Some people don't like centralized entities. Some people think that if you have, somebody who can do whatever they want with data in general, not just money, that's a problem. Let's say Facebook. Do you like their privacy style? You don't want that, right? You don't want somebody to control everything. Right now they want to come up with the coin, Libra, and everybody started, there was a huge backfire, right? Because if you don't trust them to take care of your data, how are you going to trust them to take care of your money? So that's why centralized is not, if you don't trust that entity, that's why decentralized is better. That's why open software is some would argue better. That's why Linux came and replaced and took market share from Microsoft and Apple, and everybody laughed initially at the Linux. They were like, oh, but you don't look good. Look how beautiful Windows is and how beautiful Mac is. And they laughed at it, but all these little students from all these universities everywhere, they kept writing code. And, Linux now has market share.
Well, I do think, though, that the judgment of whether or not centralized versus decentralized, that's a qualitative judgment, right? And may lean toward your politics or the political environment in which you are. But I will tell you that industry, and certainly the legal profession, is much more comfortable with limited blockchains and centralized control. So, for example, if you take the state of Delaware has said that blockchain-based records will be accepted by the state of Delaware for purposes of defining who are the owners of a legal entity. Okay? Now, that's a huge step forward.
To build on that, once Linux became, this decentralized open source stuff, companies came and they took a version of it and they created something, and those are centralized on top of the decentralized thing.
Correct.
So that doesn't mean, you can have both worlds. Everybody can be comfortable in their own environment.
But I think the point is that the concept of a decentralized entity is somewhat of an oxymoron, right? If it's decentralized, there's no entity. Exactly. And now, interestingly enough, the SEC in their DAO report disposed of that issue in about a nanosecond and said, yeah, well, they are acting in concert, and this is an entity. They are associates with a common purpose, and so therefore we're going to regulate it as if it's an issuer.
But Greg, what would have happened if the DAO would have actually registered the tokens as a security and would have operated like that?
Well, that just gets over one problem. There are a host of other issues that deal with when you're dealing with other people's money. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. The DAO was dealing with other people's money and kept trying to give the Heisman, the famous trophy with the runner with his arm extended, pushing everybody away, was trying to give the Heisman to the regulators. And, if there's any message you take away from this, it's embrace regulation. You usually can accomplish 99.9% of what you want within the framework of a regulatory arrangement as opposed to trying to avoid it. So had your hypothetical, had the DAO registered their interests, there would have been disclosure. Somebody would have had to step up and say, I'm the issuer, right? So those issues would have all been resolved. And then when there was a deviation from the disclosure, there would have been a lawsuit.
Was it actually considered money at the time of the report?
Well, whether it's money or not, it's still value.
Sure.
Right? And if I'm taking, if I take a bar of gold, it's not money, it's a commodity, and I exchange it for electronic tokens, I have given something of value for that. If I give other code, which gives me a right to goods and services, other electronic currencies, then in fact I have delivered something of value, whether or not you call it money. So it's the old barter exchanges. And that, I think, is another example of where people in their zeal to decentralize sort of missed a basic thing, which is under our tax system here in the United States, if you exchange something for something else, that's a taxable transfer unless there's a specific exception somewhere in the Internal Revenue Code. When you deliver money to buy, lunch, right? If you have a basis in your money that's different from face, you have gain or loss. Now, there's really no way to have basis in your money that's different from face unless it's not really money. So if I have something that purports to act like money, Bitcoin, and I deliver it in exchange for value, the difference between what I receive and my basis in the Bitcoin is gain or loss, and therefore I have to recognize that for tax purposes. There is no exception that I'm aware of in the Internal Revenue Code or something like that.
So I think that's one of the reasons why Bitcoin payments, at least in the U.S., have not taken off, because if every time you spend it, technically you have to reconcile your taxes.
Yes.
Every time you spend any portion, together with it being very volatile, and that typically takes, depending if you use Lightning Network or not, 10 minutes or 20 minutes to settle the payment as well.
Now, we can talk about tax theory all you want here, but to be honest, if you wanted to use electronic currencies in this way and you wanted it to also be an investment unit, you really would have to go to a consumption tax, I think, because that way you're not tracking basis. You don't have to worry about it. If I spend it, there's an add-on, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 25%, whatever the VAT type would be. That seems to me would be the only way you could use these type of valuable currencies as payment. Yes?
There is actually a different type of currencies, if you want, cryptocurrencies, which is the stable coins. which solves the face value issue and the appreciation issue. So I don't know if...
but stable coins are tied to a basket of currency or some other value.
Or one single, yeah. So for example, USD Tether, which its own issues, is tied to the US dollar. One US dollar equals more or less a US dollar. There's other ones, DAI, which is algorithmic money, for the interesting parts, which is also tied to $1 US through like a smart contract mechanism. So the volatility and the tax could be solved pretty easily, and then the actual time to settle a transaction payment with any of these could also go down really fast. So I wouldn't discount the possibility of some of these decentralized, give or take.
Well, I'm not discounting it. I think we have some time, between now and when it's actually going to be ubiquitous.
Yes.
Because, I could go down to the pizza shop on the first floor and take a dollar bill out of my wallet, or more likely use my phone with Apple Pay or some other, payment device and pay instantly and get my pizza. Otherwise, it gets cold while I wait for the Bitcoin transaction to process.
The other thing that we need to consider, we talk a lot about the anonymity of money. So something that we have not talked about yet is that fiat is actually fairly anonymous compared to bank transfers or Apple Pay. But people think that blockchain and these crypto tokens, money, valuations, whatever they're called, assets, are actually even easier to launder or to hide or to evade taxes with than with fiat. And I actually like to disagree with that.
Well, I would too. I mean, some of the regulators I've spoken to were, very happy to see malefactors using electronic transactions because they can track it like that.
They track it. I've been looking at this space and thinking about it for a long time. And the way I think is working really, really well is that you actually track what I call the interfaces. Every single time you change from one currency, one asset to another, being it from fiat to crypto or from crypto to crypto, there's a finite number of places you can do that. Most of them centralized exchanges, some of them decentralized exchanges, and maybe Sal can talk more about that. But the moment you do that exchange, you have some AML, some KYC in place, and that new value now has a tag on it. This Bitcoin started in George's account at Coinbase. So yes, maybe you won't know who owns the next address who I send that Bitcoin to, and you don't know.
But you have the address.
But you have the address, right? And you know the whole, and everybody in the world, by the way, not only me, everybody in the world knows that address, knows how much was sent to that address, knows what else was ever sent to that address, knows where that Bitcoin is going after that address. So we have the full map of all the Bitcoins ever created and through all the addresses they ever worked. Many of this graph, this huge graph. And then, thanks to the regulators and the AML and the KYC, we can put labels on some of the nodes of the graph. And if you have enough nodes and enough transactions and also amounts and other things, it turns out we can actually label most of this graph.
Yes.
So you have to be a very stupid money launderer to use Bitcoin at least. Money laundering. Like you're gonna have zero understanding of Bitcoin to do that. I mean, yeah, there are privacy coins. There are options like Monero or Cloak or other things. So people who really want to do that, they can use those, but they're delisted right now. They're being delisted everywhere because of regulators, right?
Exactly.
So there is always gonna be some dark. But that's the same with fiat. Like fiat is used for a lot of money laundering, and it's been used forever before blockchain ever came. And blockchain you actually need to be technical a little bit. You need to. It's like there's no comparison really. It's much harder.
Well, I think what you have is a reaction by regulators, or even worse, popular press that don't understand the technology. They don't understand how law enforcement and the regulators work, and when you look at the triangulation and the artificial intelligence that's applied to this, it may be a phantom issue.
I think I remember a quote from the FBI director saying, "Thank God for emails." Who invented emails?
Well, I'm famous for saying that the E in email stands for evidence. And it's the same with electronic, financial transactions. The E stands for evidence.
So, I was going to say to move a little bit beyond this. So we know it's a terrible way to try to launder money, to hide it, to steal it, because you can trace it. And even if you don't touch it and you never cash it out, that address is going to be watched forever. The agencies will be monitoring those addresses. So there is actually a need for privacy. And so what we don't want to do is also harm innocent people. So as we have the emergence of entirely native digital money, what we don't want to do is find out that, George's account, they find out the address and they can find out everybody he ever did business with. But at the same time, there's a need for regulation and compliance.
But what will happen if I receive a Bitcoin from a theft?
That too?
Well, is my Bitcoin polluted now? Am I going to jail because I received the Bitcoin from somebody I don't know?
Well, if you take the proverbial television that fell off the back of the truck, yeah, that's called receiving stolen property. And yes, that is a crime. And, while there are holders and due course rules that attempt to protect the truly innocent, if you're buying it on the street corner and you say, oh, it fell off a truck, well, it's probably not. And you will lose your money as well as the TV.
But let's say I'm running a website and I have a donation button. And, some of these bad people who launder money see my website and they really like that. And one evening they just click, donate 10 Bitcoins. Am I now, illegal because I got, a donation from some dude?
It sounds like you need to know where the trace of the money. You need to put those 10 Bitcoins through the service. They will tell you if it's green Bitcoin or red Bitcoin.
I don't know that.
It destroys the fungibility of it.
It does destroy the fungibility, but it's no different than getting greenbacks that happen to have bank die on it because it was part of a bank robbery, right?
Well, it gets complex because it's whoever owns the private keys. So what if I email them to you? It's like all of a sudden, are you implicated?
This is an evolving area of criminal law, and, it does come down to intent. It comes down to conspiracy. It comes down to, are you truly an innocent holder,
I think intent's a big factor in it.
It is. It is.
If somebody donates it to our charity or just sends it to George or sends private keys, it should be based on intent.
Well, should.
It always should.
Is the key word. We don't know. And that's, I think, one of the issues that we have to wrestle with over the next, several years. So let's get back to our problems. If we decentralize, is the expense structure actually cheaper? I don't have a CEO, or do I? I don't have a bricks and mortar location. Well, I do. That's housed somewhere. I'm simply converting it from a depreciation line to a rent line or some form of internet charge line. So, is the decentralized structure cheaper, or have I simply traded one cost, bricks and mortar, for another, IT infrastructure and engineers?
Yeah, well, possibly looking at the decentralized entity from another perspective is not only the exchange token topic that we have been discussing for the past few minutes. Maybe we talk about different types of entities. And in general, it could be that the decentralized entity is an entity governed by the community. And that brings us to the cost, maybe the cost of governance. And if we are talking about decentralizing and distributing that cost across the community, the bigger the community becomes. And this is what most of the crypto projects are trying to do, which is to expand their community. In a way, they are supporting their project, and from another perspective, they are gaining more trust in the way they manage to govern their projects.
That sounds awful lot like a tax.
I think what's interesting here is, first I would like to cut on the chase saying I'm not sure I know the answer to this question, but in the past we've seen Netflix beating Blockbuster and putting out of business.
Well, that's a convenience function.
Perhaps.
Right?
Perhaps.
Also,
on fees also.
Fees, but also everything now is content. The medium is irrelevant, right? Because I no longer need a bricks and mortar store to go to the video store for Friday night to get a tape or a CD, right?
Correct. But if you look at the expense structure, you have the centralized. Imagine the budget of a centralized entity. You have a finance line there. You have an HR line. You'll have, let's say, rent. You'll have all of this cost of goods sold, everything. And imagine the same budget of a decentralized entity. Now, you won't have rent, but you may have to compensate your employees for having to have slightly bigger apartments because now they need to work from home and they need an office in their home. So they need to make a bit more money. You may not have HR, but then you may still need to find, maybe your marketing budget will be bigger to compensate for finding community members and so on. So I think the cost structure will look different, but I'm personally not convinced either way if it's cheaper or more expensive. It may be even actually more expensive because it's more difficult to run a decentralized entity. All decentralized entities have, one of the most famous ones is the military. And, the reason the United States and the countries exist and so on is because Roman Empire was able to beat the disorganized barbarian tribes, right? And we learned from the Roman military, and that's what we're similar in there. So the same thing, modern corporations have a certain Darwinian selection in them that made them efficient and where we are today. And I'd like to see the decentralized entities and the modern corporations compete in a Darwinian way and see what happens.
But in this decentralized, especially open source or movements like Linux or Bitcoin, a lot of these people don't get paid for writing that code. It's their passion. Some of them are engineers working at Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, but behind in the evening on their weekends, this is what they do, and they do it without so there's no cost to that. And let's not forget it's not just about the cost; it's the value proposition. Amazon put a lot of retailers out of business. And they, a lot of these big businesses today, they cut the middleman, and that's what they did. And what Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are doing, they're cutting the middle way. And I had bad news for bankers because they're the middleman. And their time has come, and a lot of them are going to be put out of business.
Well, but hold on a second. Let's look at a bank. I think as you said, they are prime for decentralization. But there are other functions in banks that a lot of people forget. Number one, the bank is a payment agent, right? They will collect money from your clients, your customers, and then take that money and pay it out to your vendors, right? So it goes into an account, a centralized location, and you write checks to people. So there's a payment function. They stand ready to honor your payments on demand. Now, one of the big issues that you have, for example, with peer-to-peer lending, and this became very apparent, was that the ability of the structure, whatever it was, whether it was a fund or whether it was a peer-to-peer platform, to provide that degree of liquidity was limited. Because there were no reserves, there was no Federal Reserve backing it up, or the U.S. Treasury backing up the Federal Reserve, when it came to you as an investor on demand wanting your money. It just wasn't possible. That wasn't the design of the product.
But let's look at the numbers. So everything we're saying, J.P. Morgan's annual revenue is $109 billion. Do you think you can do the same thing they're doing as a middleman for cheaper than that?
Well, how much of that is investment banking? How much of that is for trading? How much of that is, interest on margin?
The whole pie.
Market.
The whole pie. Can we do the whole do the whole thing for less than $100 billion?
Salvatore, you wanted to join in there?
Yeah. So something that kind of stands out to me in the decentralized exchange is it's about choice, right? As an individual, I want to have the choice and the ability to decide. So when you're trading on a centralized exchange, it's a fixed percentage. That is the fee. There is no negotiation between peer-to-peer or individuals or corporations. Whereas in a decentralized, you're talking about a gas cost versus those fees. I now have control of how much I actually want to spend to make that transaction. That's, I think, a big difference. And having that control and ability to engage in your cost, right? If I don't want to spend 3% to make a transaction, I want to make it at 1%, I now have that ability. And I think at its core, that's what we're talking about when you're looking at centralized versus decentralized, is a choice. And an individual has to have, or I look at an individual wants to have that choice.
And I agree with you 100%, But let me play devil's advocate here. There's more than just the choice involved. There's the vetting of the opportunity. There's the assembly of the market participants. There's a lot of costs that are internalized, if you will, that in a flat peer-to-peer network don't get identified. So if you're simply talking about exchanging property A for property B, you're absolutely right. Disintermediate that, put it on the blockchain, smart contract. He only gets the property I'm delivering if I get the money he's delivering, and done, right? I don't need an exchange standing in between that. But think about all of the other transactions that have grown up in the world and that make part of our operation. And there are other things other than just those functions. There's finding the opportunity. There's finding the potential investor. There's assembling a consortium of investors if it's too big for one person to digest, right? So all of those functions, yes, they can be decentralized, but I haven't seen anybody come up with a model that can do it in a way that a big Wall Street firm can accomplish all of these things. So are there efficiencies possible in that $190 billion of revenue? I think you're right, yes, but, you know.
I think we just see it downsized, that banking doesn't go away.
Maybe you break it up. Like, maybe there's coexistence of other opportunities.
I think the biggest issues and costs are associated with trust and risk. And so I see a rise in non-custodial banking, which I think is the healthiest way because it eliminates a lot of the needs for insurance. You don't have to trust the system. You have nearly perfect uptime on these networks. The larger ones like Bitcoin have incredible uptime.
How do I guard against fraud, though?
Against fraud?
Yeah. I mean, the custody system, you know, the banking custody system has grown up primarily because they needed somebody to vouchsafe for the actual existence of the asset.
Well,
right?
That's why I don't think it goes away. There's things like you can still have escrow contracts, you can still have auction contracts or multi-signature.
What do they hold? How do I establish custody in an electronic world? That's an issue that the regulators have been wrestling with for a while. I mean, I have an idea of how to do it, but you know, I'd love to hear what everybody thinks.
I think there's two answers to your question. If what they hold is a cryptocurrency, you can go and look exactly how many cryptocurrencies a particular address holds as of a few minutes ago. If what it holds is the title to a house, now you still need the JP Morgans of the world. It's not going to go away. But I think we're something else that people are underestimating here is everybody becomes their own bank. Well, there's one problem with that, is that
I don't have that much money.
No, very cheap to become your own bank. All you have to do is to create an account on the wallet network of your choice. So blockchain.info or MyEther wallet, whatever. You just go there, it takes 3 minutes, and you have your own bank. You can take deposits, you can transfer money, you can make payments, you can hold your accounts, you can earn interest. 3 minutes, become your own bank. There's one problem with that, is that my understanding is that even brick-and-mortar banks get robbed regularly. And when we don't even know how often the banks get robbed, nor do I want to know. I don't need to know that. And there is FDIC insurance, and they have actual insurance, and they spend a lot of money actually physically on their security of their servers, on the security of their branches, on the double-pane windows they put in front of the tellers. And despite that, they get robbed. So I think you've heard of all of these wallets and individuals, and I'm talking about grandmas, I'm talking about professional IT people who have cryptocurrencies who get hacked. Yeah. So there's a problem with being your own bank, is that you also have the being your own bank problems. You're exposed to crime. And you can get hacked the smart way, let's say, by somebody calling AT&T and telling that they are me, and they bought a new phone, and here's a new SIM card, and they should activate the new SIM card. This happened to me.
Wow.
They can be hacked.
Me too.
T-Mobile this time. But of course, they went to these exchanges, and there was nothing. I have $1.2.
What? I mean, I guess they're running out of big targets now.
Hey, going to none of those $1.2.
Exactly. But that's the whole point. I mean, if you're your own bank, don't keep it on these exchanges or on online wallets. You can have it in cold storage.
Security evolves as well. So together with being your own bank.
But it's just security, but also there's a connotation associated with the word bank.
Yes.
And and that's the sort of the holder in due course problem. The fact that when I go to a bank, I'm expecting that person, that entity, whatever it is, to have enough resources to give me my money back when I need it.
Yep.
I mean, it's not a safe deposit box, but it's money that I can count on. And that, I think, is one of the problems that you have in decentralizing banks, which is there is no reserve system, there is no backup, and you are truly left to your own devices.
And another example of problems is if you send your payment to the wrong address, it's gone. There's no getting it back.
You mean there's no help desk I could call up and say,
nope.
Give my money back?
Nope, no help desk. if for any reason I put a gun to your head and I manage to get your crypto transferred to my wallet, the judge can put me in prison. I can go in there for 30 years. There is no way to shake those Bitcoin out of me, except maybe some torture, maybe. I don't know. I think there's better way.
Different type of gun. That's right. All right. Well, that takes us a little bit far afield. But how do we make money from this? I mean, obviously there's the charlatans out there who are, pump and dump schemes, as we used to call them back in the old days when it was telephone banks and paper securities. So how do you make money legitimately using these networks, using these processes? I mean, I've seen subscription models, the tax model that we talked about a moment ago, where you want to get access to the network, you got to pay. Then you have the dilution model, which is essentially the Bitcoin model. They get more coin, it dilutes the value of everybody else, but that means they have, they've taken a piece of the pie for them. I guess there's a transaction processing model, which is, again, sort of a tax model. And then there's, one that people explored a few years ago, the ICO, where it was a completely speculative bubble, where people wanted to get in, but there really was nothing underpinning it.
The most popular model that fueled the ICO craziness was the idea of scarcity.
Scarcity, yes.
Scarcity. And if you look now at what's happened since, some of the biggest networks created billions of tokens, and they have thousands of active daily addresses, which is its users or whatever it is. But the scarcity for hardly any of them has reached a point where the everyday use of their tokens creates enough scarcity to push the price one way or another. They're just too many assets. It's too easy to create them, and you don't use them enough. So that didn't go very well neither. So it's all of these are good questions, but if you don't create value, then new entrepreneurs, new investors will not come to the space. So it's required. There has to be a way to create value. The reason why the startup world is doing so well is because the investors, the VCs, the whole industry now, they've been making money on this for tens of years. And the smartest, some of the smartest, at least graduates from universities and who before would go to try to work for IBM or work for large companies, now a fair share of them are looking at their older peers who became billionaires through startups and want to do the same thing. So if these networks don't reliably, predictably make money for investors and operators, the whole space is going to die.
I see that typically you make money out of selling benefit to your customer. Right? You need to deliver benefit at the end of the day. So those decentralized entities, again, I kind of look at them as environment, as platforms that you can build applications that would deliver value to your clients.
Yeah, but that's all in the eye of the beholder, right? The client has to see a benefit of value to what you're delivering. So in the peer-to-peer exchange of a security or a commodity, the value is it's instantaneous, T0. which is great, number one. Number two, I have absolute assurance of payment against delivery. So that's also a very valuable thing. And number three, I'm avoiding costs. I'm not paying exchange fees. I'm not paying brokerage commissions, whatever it is that would act as friction on the transaction. So that's all the value I deliver. Now, what are the costs associated with that? If something goes wrong, where's my recourse? Right?
Correct. But this is where the utility tokens come into the picture, where I'm actually delivering value and my project is tokenized so that I am using these utility tokens as keys to unlock the services, and these are the benefits that I'm delivering.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second, because, again, one of the engines of the big fervor and froth of the ICO frenzy, get that, 3 Fs further, frenzy, was the idea that I have somehow created a utility that is fungible, tradable, and will increase in value based on scarcity. But aside from codes that you would get to play a video game, or perhaps unlocking memory in certain, most of those value propositions were never realized. And was a really hard issue of where's that tokenized value coming from if I have to have true utility and I have to be able to use it in something.
So I think one of the reasons why these were not realized is because if you look today at the decentralized apps, their websites, if you Google it, decentralized apps, you'll find all kind of websites who will rank the most active decentralized apps that came most of these ICOs. Most of them have not many users because their user interface or user experience or what you have to go through to start using these apps is very difficult. Reason one. Reason two is because they're very slow, because the networks take minutes to create new blocks and so on. So if you have I don't think it's that bad, but if you have a game where every single time you sell your sword, you get Ethereum tokens, you have to wait a few minutes for that sale to finalize. So imagine a game, you say, I want to sell my sword, I will come back in 5 minutes. There's no game anymore.
It was online shopping in the 90s. It was just, it works there, it's slow, crummy experience.
This is what I wanted to say. If you remember pet.com or whatever, like a big thing that started on the West Coast in the 90s and then it died. And then it took a lot of these tries until we got Amazon. It's like before Google was, there was a lot of other things. I don't even remember the name.
Yeah.
Right? we remember AOL before we have, right now we have, we remember the modems. There's right now we're building that infrastructure. If we stayed at that level, would the internet be so successful? No.
Definitely not.
But now we're building it.
To continue your example, we all heard of pets.com and the failure there was. But have you heard of Chewy.com, who just went public? Same business model, same everything. The idea was good. It was just too early.
Yeah, that's the thing. And also execution and there's the infra. Let's go back to when the car was invented, and let's think about those people who had horses and and there was no roads, there was no gas station. So everybody said this is a stupid idea. The cars are breaking down all the time. This is never gonna work, right? There's no infrastructure, and then you have to know how to drive that thing. Who knew that? So that was a very stupid idea, right? But now how many people are riding horses and buggies and stuff, right? We have cars now. So because we have roads, the whole thing is growing at the same time with the product. So.
But the interesting thing, let's talk about that for a second because I think it's very important. Who paid for the roads?
Taxpayers.
Taxpayers. And where did the taxpayer dollars come from? It came from essentially a user fee. How do they collect the user fee? Gasoline taxes. So gasoline taxes at first the state level, and then the add-on of the federal gasoline taxes essentially built the infrastructure that we now use, right?
Yeah.
So as we migrate from gasoline to electric vehicles, and that's going to, accelerate, because now the electric vehicles are more than just a curiosity. As we move to electric vehicles, all of a sudden we have a free rider problem. Because now those electric vehicles are not paying the gas taxes. You have to drive it on the roads. So at some point there has to be a realization of the fact that those electric vehicles, which tend to be very heavy because they have batteries and wear tires and roads faster than, comparably equipped gasoline-powered vehicles, are not paying for the roads. And we need to figure out a way to shift the burden, at least in part, to the users. Otherwise, you have free riders, and that's not. The U.S. is not about free riders.
The decentralized network of roads and cars.
Well, that's right. That's right. That's a good example. But that network was paid for by the user.
But if we're thinking about the road system, which was developed by Eisenhower, right, at some point, right? The interstate.
Yep.
We still had roads before that, and I'm not sure how they were. Was it always a taxpayer? I'm sure there was private.
Well, yes, private turnpikes, right? Private turnpikes.
And I spent about 9 or 10 years in New Hampshire, and I know that the roads are much better here, and I know those things are privatized. So like the tolls, there's private companies behind those to collect that money because they take care of the thing. So it's not all just public. We shouldn't expect all government to solve these problems. I'm not about that. I'm all about private.
I agree with you, but ultimately, if you're using a model that's a turnpike model where you have to pay a ticket or toll or whatever, barrier tolls or ticket tolls, however you want to describe it, those are examples of tokens, right? Yeah. One of the classic examples of the utility token is the old Garden State Parkway in New Jersey, where in order to go through the barrier tolls to get down to the Jersey shore, you had to throw 50 cents, 75 cents.
I got mine once.
Into the basket, right? And that's a barrier token toll, right? And if you take that model and you translate it into what we're doing here, that's like moving to the next level of the game. That's like accessing memory. That's like accessing new functionality. You have to put a token in.
That's some of what we're doing with Tezos or on Ethereum. Some would argue for like EOS and these other platforms is public infrastructure because you need it. What's unique on Tezos is actually we use inflation funding to incentivize people to improve the code base, and to secure the network.
Now, what's inflation funding? How does that work?
Inflation funding is effectively because it only works because we have a governance system in place, which
centralized governance.
Decentralized governance of the protocol. So it's a very, very small target.
Okay.
And we're working with it, and it's based off of a game called Nowak, where one of the rules is you can change the rules. And right now we have about 460 validators, and with each voting cycle, you can propose code, and you can attach an invoice to it. And if we allow the code to go through, then it will pay out, the network will produce those funds to incentivize people to continue to improve the network.
So you call it an inflation model, but it's basically a dilution model, where you're diluting the value of what's already issued by giving new tokens to someone who's added value to the business.
Yeah.
So theoretically it should be the same value, but you never know.
It's been we're very early on. We're only in our second voting cycle. However, it's interesting. It's actually a pretty stable model, but just this decision-making and how do we improve the roads? How do we, attach fees? There's also companies that the Tezos Foundation in Switzerland had I believe they invested in, like Chorus Mobility, to get into the electric cars and to be able to transact fees, whether it's just trading information or to perhaps you want, like on Boston 93, we have an HOV lane. Maybe you need to get to the hospital faster, or you need to get in the fast lane, and you can actually pay the other vehicles to pass them.
What I find fascinating is taking decentralized approach, which we're familiar with in hardware or other things, but bringing it to not controlling the rules of the network. There's no one president that can veto the proposals.
Correct.
And what's really fascinating is imagining that all the subway riders today in New York can together decide to change the fare. What's going to happen? If they reduce it too much, they're going to stop working because they run out of money. If they increase it too much, they pay from their own pocket. So that's theory.
Well, the advantage in the governance portion is if you align it correctly, a majority of the riders will be happy. And so that's what we're doing is we're talking about network preservation. We have the same problem with large corporations in America. Companies like Microsoft, they'll grow too large. They have to consolidate. They might break off parts. And this isn't much different. And we can all argue that it's cheaper to run a dictatorship, But
the American legal jurisprudence has always gone after those monolithic entities, the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, considered to be in restraint of trade because they're increasing the price. Now, in a decentralized model where you have, inflation funding as you described it, or dilution funding as I've described it, basically it becomes almost self-regulating because you're not charging more as you get bigger. You're charging less.
But the problem with that, my understanding is that in California, part of the voting system, you have a lot of proposals on the ballots. And some of these proposals are usually well-intentioned. Should we help financially this category of the population, or should we help that category, or should we spend this much on the environment, or whatever the proposals are? And when you're there in the booth and you have to vote, you have a pen in your hand, whatever you're voting with, and yes, should I help these people, or no, should the state not help these people? Most people vote yes. And the result is that it's very difficult to equilibrate the budget of the state, and we had some history of that.
Well, and also remember the most famous use of the California proposition system was to limit property taxes and income taxes. And when that went through back in the 90s, or I guess it was the 80s, that almost broke the bank of the state because it was so draconian, the change, and it became very difficult to govern. You're absolutely right.
So imagine Tezos having, what's the population of California? 50 million? I don't know, some big number, right? Imagine Tezos having 50 million users, and imagine majority deciding, you know what, every Tezos user should receive $1,000 a month.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot of people. It's actually it's spawned a very conservative culture, trying to move the bar on things. And so...
Right, because if I've spent time and money learning something or building infrastructure to accommodate something in order to change it, there's got to be a really darn good reason to make that change. And what's the benefit? Because it's going to cost me, however many thousands, millions, billions of dollars to change my systems, right? So going back to our decentralization, let's take one example. Trading for securities. Exchanges do three things, right? They marriage broker, they price discover or provide price discovery opportunities, and then they act as the fulfillment agent. They stand between buyer and seller and guarantee performance. If I could do that faster, cheaper, better, and therefore save time and money for investors, if I could go to T0 and have instantaneous transfer on a smart contract, then all of a sudden investors are going to say, this is a good thing. I'm willing to spend that money that I need to in order to rebuild my infrastructure. But I don't think that necessarily, at least in that one industry, the decision's been made. Now, let's go to an industry that you and I are very familiar with, peer-to-peer lending, where there is no central exchange.
Yep.
So you build a model where there is no central exchange that facilitates secondary market trading, and you get congressional and regulator buy-in. Now you've got something that's very powerful because you filled a need.
Yes.
Where there is no option right now.
I like that. Non-custodial banking. If you can. So that's what we really want. Is we want to slowly build a partnership with regulators, and we need something to secure this. It's going to take a lot of time and effort.
So if you turn the clock back 50 years, I wasn't there, even though I'm very old. You used to buy a government bond, and it would have coupons attached. And you'd literally take a pair of scissors, cut the coupon, take that coupon to the bank, and you'd cash the coupons. That's where coupon codes come from. I didn't know that. Yeah. That's where the concept of coupon cutting comes from. And but those coupons were also considered to be registered securities. So theoretically, I could have used that, transferred it to George to pay a bill, right? That's the original tokenization of economic opportunity. It was done on paper. It was very inefficient. It was very slow. And if George didn't like the fact that he had to then go to the bank, prove who he was, that he didn't steal the coupon, blah, 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 he'd only give me 80 cents on the dollar for it. And so now, fast forward, basically, what's the model that says that that coupon that I just clipped should be a medium of exchange? Because that's what we're asking investors and consumers to do. We're asking them to trade clipped coupons as a currency.
So now I'm starting to understand why my banker neighbors always frown upon this stuff, because they understand these things. I don't. So,
right.
So as a technical guy, I have no problem doing everything that Bitcoin is about. All these people who understand regulations, lawyers and bankers, they are slowly moving because of these issues that you see. I was not even aware of those.
Right. But that's why these kind of conversations are great.
Yes.
Because, we get the business types, the legal types, the entrepreneurs, the techs, and say, okay, here's a problem. How do we solve it? Using the tools that we have available, recognizing that we don't want to, let anybody lose money unless it's an investment bet. Right? An investment bet, you pay your money, you take your shot, that's fine. But in terms of, operational bet, there has to be that safekeeping. And there also has to be a common acceptance. Can I trade that coupon? Does it make any sense? Where's the value associated with that coupon versus the underlying bond? And I think, until we solve that sort of psychological issue, we're going to have those kind of, I understand it.
The way I see this is we definitely want every participant to at least be trained on the risks they're taking, to be aware of them. If they're okay with the risk, great for them. If they're not, they shouldn't participate.
Okay, so we have about 2 minutes, lightning round. Any last words? I'm going to start with you on the phone. Salvatore, anything?
I mean, at this point, in taking in the conversation, ideally, the future should be one where we combine the speed, efficiency, and the focus of a centralized system or exchange with the security, incorruptibility, and the creativity of a decentralized one. And I think that's the aim of these conversations, is how do we merge those two to end up with the ultimately decentralized system.
George. A French friend of mine said that the Americans make it a business, the Chinese copy it, and the Europeans regulate it. And I'm looking around at that, and I kind of like it. Now, let me actually continues.
Mohammed,
I'm actually thinking that we can move now to crypto 2.0 and move further from the exchange value of the blockchain entities and the decentralized entities onto the using it as a platform to deliver value and to deliver benefit to our customers using the different types of application that it actually opens to us.
Adrian.
So one thing that I see is positive is I believe for 30, 40 years these banks have not moved and improved their service at all. And right now they feel a little bit of fire under their butt because we have to move them. They have the same software from the 60s in the SWIFT system. And if I send money somewhere or I get a wire, it still takes a week. I'm talking from a country to the other. And they take a huge chunk of it, and I have a problem with that. So right now, I'm actually enjoying this process.
Sean.
So I would say, to wrap it up, I would also not just think about currency or exchange of value, but that data has value. And the banks might, be seeing a little bit of the flames, but Silicon Valley is already on fire, and it's burning down due to the emergence of GDPR-type regulations that are coming to the U.S. It's almost guaranteed, especially in healthcare. And how do we secure that on a new Internet when we have emerging 5G networks and this stuff is moving faster? So that's also part of what we're trying to build alongside with currency and medium exchange.
Well, here's a thought on building on that. Decentralized everything. I own my own data, and no one else has it. And when I want to use my data, I got to put a token in the machine, and that sends it to my doctor, or it sends it to my bank, or it sends it to my lender, or whomever. Maybe that's the model that we have to go for.
That's part of the reason I came into this is IoT has been expanding. We have devices that are connecting everywhere. And that part of the issue is that we don't control our data. And that's not acceptable, especially in healthcare.
That's perfect. What you said is a solution. The only problem is I don't want a centralized entity to control that network and turn me off so that I cannot even put the token in and participate.
Interesting.
Right.
That's for the next conversation. Thank you very much to our listeners, and we will see you in November, where our topic's going to be recent SEC enforcement trends. Take care now.